Hello, and thank you for joining as we demonstrate how to complete the admission medication reconciliation. To begin, you must launch Portal to locate your patient. If your patient is on your census, going to the Alerts tab, you'll note that the MedRec column will indicate an admission MedRec is needed. This is triggered when the nurse confirms the home medications. We will now demonstrate how to complete an admission MedRec report. First, launch the MedRec tab, and then launch Reconcile Medications. This will open a window which displays all available MedRec templates. There's admission, transfer, and discharge. In the section below, you'll note an empty screen. Once a report is completed, the information will display. We'll start by launching the admission MedRec. Within the Med Reconciliation, you'll note the banner bar has specific demographic information related to this patient. Age, MRN number, attending physician, and allergies. Clicking on the Details hyperlink will further display additional details to the patient's allergies. Within the template, there are two columns, Home and Hospital Meds and the Working List. You can also elect to change your view of how the meds display. Currently, we are defaulted to Drug Class. Changing to Alpha will sort the medications by alphabetical order. Conversely, sorting by home and hospital meds will display home medications first and then hospital medications. Currently, this patient has 2 home medications documented in their record. As you'll note, the captopril has a statement next to it indicating that it is unconfirmed. This serves as a visual cue that the nurse on the floor has not yet reviewed this home medication with the patient, and you may want to verify that this is still a current med. Conversely, the glyburide has already been confirmed as taking 1.25 milligram tablet by mouth 2 times daily. The metoprolol is actually a hospital medication that was ordered by another clinician in the HEO application. You'll note that it states pending RX. This means that the pharmacist has not yet profiled the med in Horizon Medication Management. Although not profiled, you can still act upon this medication. Every medication listed needs an action completed against it, as indicated by the buttons to the right of the medication. As you'll note, home medications have 3 options for action items: order, modify, and don't order. Home medications are configured so that they can be modified if the clinician chooses to modify some part of that order, including dose form, frequency, and duration. On the other hand, hospital medications that are ordered in HEO can only be continued or discontinued. They cannot be modified in the Horizon Medication Reconciliation module. Let's continue with completing an admission medication reconciliation. For the captopril, we are going to elect to modify the order. As you'll note, a screen populates displaying the available meds. We will now click Next, and the template will open by which you can now modify your order. We will change the dose to 6.25. The route will be oral. How often? We will switch to TID. As you'll note, the when to start defaults to next schedule, and for how long, 30 days. The clinician may elect to change those or leave them as the default values. Saving the medication will now move that medication to your working list. If you decide to not need that med, you can clear the entry by clicking the back arrow. For the glyburide, we will select the action item as don't. And as you'll note, the medication will not move to the working list. And because metoprolol is in HEO order, the button defaults to continue. At this point, if you're not ready to complete the medication reconciliation, you can elect to save it as a draft. A draft form can be accessed at a later time and will not be written to the patient's chart. We will now relaunch the MedRec tab so that we can edit this draft admission rec. As you'll see, you have different options now, and you can either edit or you can delete the draft admission medication reconciliation. If electing to delete a draft form, note it will not be available in the chart or part of the patient's permanent medical record. Let's continue to edit. Another feature of Horizon Medication Reconciliation is that in lieu of going through HEO to enter orders, you can add meds directly through HMR. We will add a new med, and we will add aspirin. Please note, in the screen, you may only search for individual med orders. You will not be able to launch an iForm or order outlines from this window. Also, please note, you may see meds that are prefixed by ED. These medications are specific to the emergency department workflow, and although you can see these medications, you will not be able to complete a MedRec should you select a med that's prefixed by ED. Note, an override reason is required to complete the aspirin. This is because this patient has a documented allergy to aspirin. If the patient has a documented allergy, or if a drug interaction is noted, you will get this alert window. You can either cancel or you can select an override reason. We will select the potential benefit believed to outweigh potential risks so that we can move forward with the MedRec process. This override reason will also display in the chart. For the dose, we will select 81 milligrams. And note all of their values have already defaulted. Once save is completed, you'll note the medication will now populate the working list. Also in this entry, you'll note the yellow triangle with the exclamation point. This is just a visual cue that there's a warning regarding this particular medication. You may also elect to add comments to the MedRec form. And now, we will complete the reconciliation. This is a final confirmation of what orders have been placed during the MedRec process. Refreshing the screen, you'll now note that the MedRec tab displays what medication reconciliation report has been completed. Train MD 30 has completed admission MedRec at 12:23 on May 30th. If you wish to print the form, clicking on the report name will open the report, and you may elect to print from the print icon. Scrolling down the report, you'll note the home medications display, and the action taken is listed in the right-hand column. For instance, captopril was ordered with a modification, and the glyburide was not ordered for hospital use. You'll also note that the hospital medication that was entered in HEO is displaying with an action of continue. The aspirin that was added via the MedRec is displaying as a new medication order. And your comments are displayed in the comments section towards the bottom of the report. Moving back to the Alerts tab, you'll now note that the MedRec column displays as complete for the admission MedRec. Thank you for joining as we've demonstrated the admission MedRec process, and should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call the help desk at extension 7000. Hello, and thank you for joining us as we demonstrate the Horizon medication reconciliation process. This is part 2, and we will demonstrate how to complete a transfer MedRec. Once again, Portal will be launched and we will locate the patient of record. The MedRec tab can then be selected and the Reconcile Medication button launched. This will open up the module, and you'll note that the Transfer MedRec is listed in the middle of the screen. Selecting Start will open the Transfer MedRec, and we may complete the orders. You'll note that the Transfer MedRec has a very similar look and feel as the Admission MedRec. Moving on to the home and hospital meds, you'll note that captopril is displayed twice. The equal sign next to the medication indicates that the medication appears twice in the list. Medications that have been ordered on the Admission MedRec will default to the working list on your Transfer MedRec. You'll note captopril 6.25 was an order that was placed on the Admission MedRec, and the action item buttons will default to continued. The home med will still be present amongst your Transfer MedRecs. However, none of the action items will be highlighted. You will still need to select the desired action. For the purpose of this demo, we will select Don't and leave the second captopril entry as continued. Moving down to metoprolol, you'll note that that has also defaulted to a continued status. Once again, that is because this med was ordered in HEO by another clinician. Although the glyburide was not ordered on the Admission MedRec, it is still present in the list of medications as it is documented as an active home medication. We will need to select an action item in order to complete the med reconciliation. We will select Don't, and you'll note the medication does not move to the working list. Finally, we see the aspirin. The aspirin once again defaults to continued because the aspirin was added as a new med within the Admission MedRec process. You'll also note that the captopril, metoprolol, and aspirin do not have the modify button. This is because they are inpatient orders that were placed in HEO and they cannot be modified on the Transfer MedRec. During the Transfer MedRec process, the clinician can elect to add a new med. This is in place of having to go through HEO. Adding a new med will display in the patient's chart and will also cross over to pharmacy, so pharmacy will receive the order. We will add digoxin and select the first entry. You'll note that most of the fields are pre-populated. However, a dose still needs to be entered. We will select 0.125 milligrams and leave the remaining fields as they are. Clicking Save will now add the medication directly to your working list. At this point, you also have the option to save a draft, to add comments, or complete the reconciliation. We will complete the reconciliation, and you will get a confirmation screen displaying the orders placed. Refreshing the screen will once again display the additional report that was completed. If you'd like to view the report, you can select the report name and left click. You'll note the report name displays as Level of Care Change Medication Reconciliation Report. In addition, a clinician can elect to print the report if so desired. You'll note home medications continue to display in the report with the actions taken. Active medications will display under hospital medications. Therefore, you'll note aspirin, captopril, metoprolol have all been ordered or continued from the admission medrec, and a new medication order of digoxin was added during the transfer medrec process. This concludes Part 2 of the medication reconciliation process for a transfer medrec. Thank you for joining us, and if you should have any questions, please call the help desk at extension 7000. Hello, and welcome to the final video demonstration for Horizon Medication Reconciliation. During this last demo, you will be shown how to complete the Discharge medrec report. Once again, we've launched Portal, located a patient, and will now launch the medrec tab. You'll note the Discharge medrec is towards the right hand of the screen, and selecting Start will now open the template, which has a very similar look and feel to the admission and the transfer medrec. One difference is that the working list on the right hand side of the screen does not auto-populate with any medications. Every med present that has an action item will need to be completed prior to continuing or completing the med reconciliation process. Please note that hospital medications that were ordered during the stay will auto-default to the stop action item. Some examples are the captopril, the atenolol, the sodium chloride IV fluids, and the colase. Although these have defaulted to stop, the ordering clinician may still elect to select another action item. For instance, if the ordering clinician wanted to enter an RX for atenolol, they could do so right from the line item. Moving back to the top of the screen, you'll note that the captopril has an equal sign next to both entries. This indicates that the medication appears elsewhere in the chart. The first entry is actually the hospital medication order, once again defaulting to stop. The second entry is the home medication that has been documented as being active. When a patient has a medication that is ordered as a hospital medication and also has a home medication, both entries will display in the medication reconciliation window. You can elect to order or continue from either of these meds. We will select Continue for the home medication entry. On another note, selecting the Clear button will take away the action item. You'll note that if you wish to do a bulk action of continuing medications or not resuming medications, you can do so by selecting Continue at the bottom of the screen. Upon selecting the Continue button for all home meds, you'll note that the captopril and the glyburide have now both moved to the working list. We will clear these entries so that we may continue in showing you the demo for the discharge medrec. We will select Continue for the captopril home medication, and for the glyburide, we will select Modify, as the ordering clinician would like to change the frequency. We will change the frequency to every other day. Note, selecting Save now moves the glyburide to the working list. Upon continuing a home medication, you may also elect to create a prescription directly from the home medication. For instance, selecting RX on captopril will create a prescription for the captopril. You'll note the captopril template has opened and all required fields will be surrounded by a yellow highlight. You will not be able to save this prescription until all respective and required fields are completed. Clicking the Save button, we get a pop-up asking which action should appear in the documentation. We will select Continue since we have not modified this prescription. Moving through the list of medications, you'll also note that there are several medications that do not have an action item associated to them. For instance, metoprolol and lactated ringers are present in the home and hospital medication list. However, there are no options to continue, modify, or stop. This indicates that these medications were ordered as hospital medications. However, at some point during the admission and stay, these medications were discontinued. The ordering clinician will not have to do anything with these particular medications. During the discharge medication process, you may also elect to add a new medication. We would like to add a med of Advil. You'll note entering Advil into the search screen yields all Advil available in the FDB database. Because the patient has a documented allergy to aspirin, a drug allergy alert has populated the screen. You may override this alert and move forward in completing and adding the new medication. All required fields must be completed prior to being able to save. A review of the working list column, you'll note the ibuprofen, which was just added as a new med, will display a yellow triangle with an exclamation point, indicating that the patient has a drug allergy that was overwritten by the clinician. Moving down the screen, you'll also note that the captopril had a prescription that was created. Up until this point, you can still remove the prescription if so desired. The ordering clinician may also decide at this point that they are not ready to actually complete the reconciliation. They may elect to save it as a draft and return at a later time. They may also elect to save a draft and delete, which will render the discharge med list no longer available in the patient's chart. We will now complete the medication reconciliation for discharge. Once again, the drug allergy alert populates, and the override reason defaults to the originally entered override reason. At this point, the ordering clinician will need to select one of the radial buttons. Because the patient has had a prescription created, we will want to complete the medication reconciliation and go to the prescription writer. If the prescription writer is bypassed at this point, please note that the prescription has not yet been submitted and will not commit to the patient's electronic medical record. We will now select a printer select an action which has defaulted to print, and then submit. You'll note that the captopril has now moved from the pending tab to the submitted tab, thus indicating that the prescription has been submitted. We will now exit the electronic prescription writer and refresh the screen, noting that the discharge medication reconciliation report is now listed in the MedRec tab. In addition, the discharge medication list is also displayed within the tab. If you desire to view or print either of these reports, clicking on the report name will launch to the completed report. At this point, you can elect to print via the print icon. This concludes the video demonstration for the discharge medication reconciliation process. If you have any questions, please call the help desk at extension 7000. Thank you for joining us.